Hello everyone and welcome to this new video of Deep in Politics. So last time out we studied the 2020 presidential election result of the state of Florida. This time we will be focusing on the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, like Florida, was also a very important battleground state in this 2020 election, and the results were very close between the two candidates. But before going into details, let me give you a general overview of this state. So North Carolina is a medium state when I'm talking about its size and its population. It has a population of around 10.5 million people, and so it's given 15 electoral votes. It's not one of the biggest states, but it's not a small one, and so a 15 electoral vote are important for any candidate who wants to win election. And especially that North Carolina is a battleground state since 2008. Both parties are very close in the state, and so the two candidates of both parties really want to win the state. So after having talked about the population and its electoral votes, let me move a little bit to its ethnic diversity. So like Florida, North Carolina is a diversified state when it comes to race and ethnicity. As you see, there is 62% of white population. A black population are very present in the state. They have their word to say in any election, as they form 21% of the overall population. You also have 10% of Hispanic voters, a little bit of Asian and Native. So it's a diversified state. It's a state where the white voters are the majority, but not a very big majority. They represent less than 2/3 of the total population, and so the minority voters have their word to say in this state. So now let me talk a little bit about the percentage of bachelor degree among the adult population of North Carolina. So as you see here, 32.3% of the adult people in North Carolina have a bachelor degree. This is very close to the average of the US, which is around 33.1%. And so North Carolina have a good average of people having a bachelor degree among its adult population. So that being said, you would expect Democrats to do good in this state, as minority generally vote with them more than they do with Republican. And as I said, North Carolina has a good share of minority voters. In addition to this, North Carolina have a relatively high percentage of bachelor degree, and as we said, people with a bachelor degree also tend to vote more for Democrat than for Republican. But before going into details and studying the result of the election, let me give you also a general overview of the voting history of the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina was a strong Republican state. Since 1968, Republicans were able to win almost all the election in this state until 2008. They even won the election. They even won the state in the 2000 and 2004 presidential election by a margin of around 13 points. So it's a very big margin. It wasn't even a battleground state, not even a close state. However, since 2008, the result began to change. Republicans weren't able they lost the state in 2018 to President Obama, who won it by 0.3%, and despite the fact that President Obama lost the election in the state of North Carolina in 2012, he only lost it by 2%, meaning that the state of North Carolina is no longer a safe Republican state, but it's a very contested battleground state. And despite the fact that President Trump was able to win the state again in 2016, he only did it by a margin of 3.6%, which is very far from the 13-point margin that the Republicans were able to win the state with in 2000 and 2004. So that being said, it's very clear that the state of North Carolina is a battleground state. It's a state where both parties are very present in it, and most importantly, of course, the results are very, very close, because even in 2020 and despite the fact that President Trump was able to keep the state with him, he only won it by a very small margin, around 1.3 or 1.4%, which once again proved that this state is no longer a safe Republican state, but a battleground state. So that being said, let's turn to the analysis of this 2020 presidential election in the state of North Carolina. Before talking about numbers, let me give you the main conclusion that we can take from this 2020 election result. So, like everywhere else in the US, the stronghold for Republican were the white rural voters. This was the main base of voters for Republicans. They did fairly well in these among this category of voters. Well, they didn't do as well as other states, but still, this was a stronghold. They did well. They were able to motivate these white rural voters, these very conservative voters, and so they formed for them their base, their stronghold to win this state. But most importantly for Republicans, they were able to surge among minorities, among rural minorities, especially among especially among black voters. Yes, this was quite a surprise. No one was expecting the Republican to do even better than 2016 among black rural voters, but this was the case, and this was one of the main reasons that made Republican carry the state and keep it with them, especially that Democrats were able to do very, very well among the category of white educated voters, and this was the case elsewhere, everywhere in the US, but still in North Carolina they did very, very well among the category of white educated voters. They were even able to do well among all category of white voters. Even among rural voters, they did not lose big compared to 2016. They might have lost a little bit in some county, but overall they did well among all category of white voters. So the main reason for Republican being able to keep this state is their surge among black voters, among rural black voters. And if it weren't from this category of voters, I'm sure that the result in North Carolina would be even closer, and the Democrat would have had a chance to flip the state. So just one last remark before getting into details. I said it in the general overview on the video about the general overview of this 2020 election result. The polling industry got it wrong in many states. Of course, North Carolina was one of these states. As you see here, the average polling industry the eve of the election was predicting a win for President Biden by around 2%, whereas he ended up losing the state by more than 1.3%. And as you see here, you have many polling industry that were giving President Biden a win by more than 5 points. You have 4.6 points, and only 7 points here, and only a few polling industry were predicting a Trump win. Look, you barely see red numbers. So once again, the polling industry got it wrong in North Carolina. Now let's move to the general result. So as you see, in 2016, President Trump was able to win the election in the state of North Carolina by 3.6%, whereas in 2020 he was able to win it by only 1.3 or 1.4%. This means that the Democrats were able to improve in the state and to close the gap between them and the Republican by 2.2%. Let's move to our table in order to be able to analyze this result better. So as you see here, in 2016, President Trump won the state of North Carolina 49.8% to 46.2%. This is a margin of 3.6%. In 2020, the Republicans were able to win 0.3% more in the general votes. Their score went up from 49.8% to 3.1%. However, the gain for Democrat was higher. They were able to improve by 2.5%, going up from 46.2% to 48.7%, and this is a shift of 2.2% in favor of Democrat. So like everywhere else in the US, this 2020 election in North Carolina saw a huge number of voters turn out compared to 2016. Indeed, 20% more people voted in the 2020 election compared to 2016. The Republicans were able to improve or to get 16.7% more voters compared to 2016. This is around 400,000 additional voters, whereas the Democrats were able to get 22.6% more voters compared to their score in 2016. This is an additional number of voters of around 500,000. So that being said, we saw the overview image of the election in North Carolina. Let's get a little bit more into detail now. So, like in Florida, I've divided the counties in North Carolina in two groups: small county and medium-sized and big counties. Let's begin by small counties. As expected, as everywhere else in the US, the Republican did better in this category of counties than Democrat. The reason is because these counties are rural, or if not, they are very small counties. There isn't a big population, and so when the country is small, it's more close on itself, and people tend to be more conservative. And as I said, the Republican is the conservative party in the US, and so they usually do better in these small counties. And this is the case in North Carolina, as the Republicans were able to improve compared to 2016 in 51 out of 76 small counties. As I said, the main reason is for Republican to improve. The main reason for Republican improving in these counties is the strong base of white rural voters, and most importantly, in the case of North Carolina, their surge among minority voters, because as we will see right now, their biggest improvement compared to 2016 came from small counties where there is an important share of minority voters, and especially of black voters. So the first county that I want to talk about is the county of Warren. It's Warren County. This is Warren County. So as you see here, the Democrats were able to win the state in 2016 by 65% to 32.7%. Whereas in 2020, they were able to keep the state, or the county, of course, but they won it by a smaller margin, 62.3% to 36.5%. So in order to be able to analyze these results better, we will also move to our tables. So as you see here, in 2016, this was the result: the Democrat winning the county by 65% to 32.7%, whereas in 2020 they only won it 62.3% to 36.5%. So compared to 2016, the Democrat lost 2.9%, going down from 65.2% to 62.3%, whereas the Republican improved by 3.8%, meaning that their result went up from 32.7% to 36.5%. And so countywide there was a shift of 6.7% in favor of Republican, meaning that the Republicans were able to close the gap that separated them from the Democrat by 6.7% compared to the 2016 result. So now let's move and see a little bit of information about this county of Warren. As usual, we will go to Census Reporter, from where I bring all my data, and you will see what happened and you will see the information that this site provides us about Warren County. So this is Warren County. It's a small county in North Carolina that has a population of a little bit less than 20,000 people. Moving to its ethnic diversity, here we are. You see that black voters form alone half of the population and of the voters of this county. The second biggest ethnic group is white voters. However, the fact that Republicans were able to surge in this county and to do a lot better than 2016 show you how good they did among black rural voters. As I said, this category of voters form around 50% of the voters in Warren County, and so the only way to explain this surge the only way to explain the gain of Republican in this county is that they were able to do very well among the category of black voters. And the black voters in this county, like all the other voters and population of this county, are rural voters, are non-educated voters, and by non-educated voters I'm meaning people that don't have a bachelor degree. As you see here, the percentage of bachelor degree among the population of Warren County is very low. It's less than 16%. So this is the first county that shows how good the Republican did among minority rural voters and especially black voters. Let's take another example and see the result in the county of Halifax. So just so it loads. So Halifax County is a bigger county than Warren County, but still it's somehow small county that has a population of 50,000 citizens. Once again, you see that black voters and black population form the majority of the voters in this county. They represent around 53% of the voters. So now let's see the result of the election in 2016 and in 2020 in this county. So in 2016, the Democrats were able to win the county 62.6% to around 36% for Republican. As for 2020, of course, the Democrats were able to keep the state or the county, but they only won it by a little bit more than 20%, and a general result of 60.4% to 39.2%. Once again, let's go to the table to compare these results. You will see here that compared to 2016, the Republicans were able to win or to gain around 3.4 or 3.3%, whereas the Democrat lost around 2.2%, meaning that that there was a shift in this country in favor of the Republican by 5.4%. The Republican being able to close the gap that separated them from the Democrat by 5.4% compared to 2016. And once again, the only possible way of explaining this surge of the Republican in this county is that they were able to do very good among the category of black rural voters. Once again, we see that the percentage of bachelor degree is very low in this county. It's less than 15%, meaning that this county is very rural and very conservative, and that the Republicans were able to surge among black rural voters, which explains their surge and them doing better in the county of Halifax compared to 2016. I will give one last example showing that the Republican did well among the category of minorities, and I am stressing on this point because, as I told you, generally it's the Democrats who do well among the minority voters, and especially among black voters. But as we see, they regressed in 2020, and the Republicans were able to take advantage of that. So the last example that I will be giving is a county called Scotland County. So once again, before going to the ethnic diversity, let's compare the result of 2016 to 2020. So this is Scotland County. In 2016, the Democrats were able to win the county 52.5% to 44.9%, whereas in 2020 they lost ground in this county, and they lost a lot of ground in this county as as the Republicans were able to flip the counties. They were able to not only close the gap that separate them from Democrat, but they were able to win the county after having lost it in 2016. As you see, they were able to win it by 50.6% to 48.7%, and this is a big shift. We will go to the table in order to see it more clearly. So as you see, the Republican gained 5.7% compared to 2016, as they were able to improve their score from 44.9% to 50.6%, whereas the Democrat lost 3.8% as they went down from 52.5% to 48.7%, and this enabled the Republican to flip the county and to gain a total of 9.5% over Democrat compared to 2016. So a big shift in favor of Republican in this county. And once again, we see that this county has a big share of black voters, of black rural voters. They are almost the same number of white voters, and as we already knew, that white voters are gonna vote for Republican and for Donald Trump, and they already did so in 2016. So the only possible explanation for them surging and doing that good in this county compared to 2016 is that black voters or rural black voters shifted toward Republican. And once again, we will see that this county has a small or a low average of bachelor degree among its adult population, around 15.5%. So that being said, I think that it's clear for us that the Republican did very well among minority voters and especially black voters. But however, despite them doing good among this category of voters and that being unexpected, they ended up winning the state by a smaller margin than 2016. And the reason is that Democrats surged big. They surged very big among the category of white educated voters. And this not only made them close the gap that the Republicans were able to create by their surge among black voters, but they also made them do better than 2016 in the overall result. So among the small counties, the Democrats were able to improve in 25 out of 76 small county, with most of these improvements coming from county with white educated voters, where there is a big portion or a big number of white educated voters. And of course, their biggest improvement came in such county. I will also give two examples here that shows how good the Democrats were able to do among white educated voters. So the first county that I will be studying with you and that will show you how good the Democrat did among white educated voters in small county is the county of Dare. So first of all, let's see the result of this county. So in 2016, President Trump was able to carry the county by 58.4% to 36.8%, whereas in 2020, although he won the county, he only won it by 57.7% to 41.1%. So there is an important shift toward the Republican which were able to close the gap. And here we go once again to the tables in order to be able to compare the results. So you see that compared to 2016, the Republican lost 0.7% as they went down from 58.4% to 57.7%, whereas the Democrats were able to gain 4.3%, going up from 36.8% to 41.1%, and this is a shift of 5% in favor of the Democrat. Now going to the ethnic diversity of this county, you see that it's a county that is that almost all its population is white population. There is around 87% of white population, Also, this white population is educated, as around 35% of its adult people have a bachelor degree. This is an average not only higher than the average of North Carolina, but also higher than the average of the US on a countrywide base. And so this is also a proof that Democrat did very well among the category of white educated voters. We can see the same thing happening in Watauga County. Let's see what happened in Watauga County. This is Watauga County. So first of all, let's see the result in 2016. The Republicans were able to win the county by a very, very small margin, 47.2% to 55.7%, whereas in 2020 they won the county by a bigger margin, 53.3% to 53.3% to 45%. The table will show us more clearly the shift and how the Democrats were able to extend their lead in this county. So as you see, the Republican lost 0.7% in the county of Watauga, whereas the Democrat they went up big. They went up from 47.2% to 53.3%. And this is an improvement of 6.1%. It's a very big improvement, and we will see what were the causes. And so countywide, the Democrats were able to extend their lead by around 7%, and more precisely 6.8%, which is a big improvement. And as you see here, once again, this is a county that is where almost all its population is from white race and ethnicity. It's also a very educated population, as it has more than 42.2% of its adult citizens having a bachelor degree. This is a very big average, a very high average, and so it shows clearly that the Democrats were able to surge among white educated voters, and that this was the main reason for them closing the gap statewide. And it's clear that the Republicans struggled among these category of voters, not only in North Carolina but all across the US. And if they didn't struggle that much, I'm sure that they will have won the presidential election, because they did very, very well among minorities, and no one was expecting that. So they lost not because of what we were expecting, but because of things that we weren't expecting. We were expecting the Democrat to surge, or we were expecting the Republican to lose among minorities. They did improve, but their loss came among the white educated class. This is what cost them the election. And I do think that in previous elections they were able to win back a certain portion or a certain percentage of this category of voters. So we saw the result in small counties. I gave you examples showing that the Republican did very well among minority rural voters, whereas the Democrat did very well among white educated voters. I gave you a few examples, but these examples, or the case that we've seen in these examples, you will see them in almost all the small counties. So the conclusion for small counties is Republican doing better than expected among minority voters, whereas the Democrat surged very big among the category of white educated voters. This category that gave President Trump a big share of its vote in 2016, but it seems that it didn't do so in 2020. And as usual, among the category of white non-educated voters, we were expecting, and this is what happened, they voted in big numbers for President Trump, and they represent the stronghold of President Trump as well as of the Republican. So now moving to medium-sized and big counties. So as expected, and like everywhere else in the US, the Democrats were able to do much better than the Republican, as they were able to improve in 21 out of 23 such counties, so almost in all these counties, and even in the counties where the Republican were able to improve, in the 2 counties where the Republican were able to improve, their improvement was very small, and indeed they improved by less than 0.5%. So once again, the biggest improvement for Democrat came from counties that has a big number of white educated voters. That shows once again that this category of voters was the reason behind the Democrat not only improving in the state of North Carolina, but also winning the US presidential election countrywide. So I will give you 2 examples that shows clearly how good Democrat did among the category of white educated voters. So the first county that you will see is called Cabarrus County. Let's see what happened in this county and compare its result to the 2016. So I don't know why it's not finding it. Okay, so it's 2R instead of 1. Now we should find it. So here it is. So in this county, let's see first what happened in 2016. So in 2016, the Republican and President Trump were able to win this county by 57.7% to 38.1%. Whereas in 2020 they were able, of course, to keep the county, but they won it by a smaller margin, and more precisely 54.1% to 44.6%. Once again, we will go to our table in order to understand more precisely or more clearly what happened. So here we are. Compared to 2016, the Republican lost 3.6%, so it's an important loss. But most importantly, the Democrats were able to win or to improve by 6.5%. So overall, we have a huge shift toward the Democrat by a total percentage of 10.1%. So the Democrats were able to close the gap that separates them from the Republican by 10.1% compared to 2016. And this is a huge. And what you see here, you will see it in all the big counties across North Carolina, but maybe in a by a smaller scale or by a smaller margin. But in all the big counties in North Carolina, especially these counties where there is an important share of white voters, there was a big shift from Republican toward the Democrat, and this was the main reason for Democrat improving, despite them doing not very good among minorities. So moving to the data of Cabarrus County, we see that there is a big majority of white voters. Indeed, 66% in a big county is a lot. So you have more than 2/3 of the voters that are white voters. And here you see that this is a county that has an important percentage of bachelor degree among its adults, as it has an average of 34.4% of adult people having a bachelor degree. This is not only higher than the average of North Carolina, but also higher than the average of the US. So this shows clearly that the Democrat did very well among white educated voters, especially that if we take into consideration that the Republican, as we see, were able to improve among black voters. So in order not only to cover their loss among black voters, the Democrat had to do really well among white educated voters, and this is what they did. So another county that shows you how good Democrat did among the category of white educated voters is the county of Buncombe. So let's compare the result. So in 2016, the Democrats were able to win the state by around 15% of margin, 54.3% to 40.1%. In 2020, they did even better than 2016, as they were able to win the county by 59.9% to 38.7%, meaning by a margin that is higher than 20%. Here we go again to the tables in order to be able to compare the result. more clearly, we see that compared to 2016, the Republican lost 1.4%, going down from 40.1% to 38.7%, whereas the Democrats were able to surge, or they were able to do better they gained around 5.6% compared to 2016, as they went up from 54.3% to 59.9%. And so this led them to extend their lead in the state by 7%, and 7% in a county, not in a state, and 7% in a county that has more than 150,000 voters is huge. So it's really more difficult to improve by a big margin in big counties than in small counties, and the reason is because there's a bigger percentage and a bigger number of voters. So now moving to the data of this county, we see that once again the big majority of the voters of this county and of its population are white voters, and white populations, they represent around 85% of the total number of population. And we also see that it's a very educated population. It has more than 40% of its adult having a bachelor degree. This is way higher than the average of the US and in North Carolina. And once again, we see very clearly that the Democrats were able to surge big time among white educated voters. So now that being said, what can we deduce from this 2020 election, and where do I see North Carolina in the upcoming election, whereas it's in the 2022 midterm election or in the next presidential election in 2024? Well, first of all, what I can say for sure is that North Carolina is not anymore a safe Republican state. Republican used to win this state by a double-digit margin. We saw this in 2000 and 2004, where they were able to win the election by more than 13%. However, this is not the case anymore. Since 2008, the state of North Carolina has been a very hard and harsh battleground state. Democrats were able to close the gap very rapidly. Indeed, in 2008 they were able to win the election there after losing it in 2004 by more than 13%. And since then, despite the fact that they lost the state again, the margin was always very close. And indeed, in 2016 and in 2020, President Trump was able to win the state once by 3.3% in 2016 and by less than 2% in 2020. And this shows you how competitive this state has become. However, I do think that in any upcoming election in the state of North Carolina, Republicans have a great chance of doing a little bit better than this election, because as I said previously, this election was really the best case scenario for Democrat. I mean, all the factors and all the events that took place before the election were in their favor, whereas it's the voting by email, the polling industry, the media, the bad handling of President Trump, of the coronavirus pandemic. So all this played in favor of the Democrat. In addition to this, President Trump was a far-right candidate, and as we've seen, a big number of educated voters, especially white educated voters, don't really like far-right politics, and so they didn't really vote for President Biden, but they rather voted against President Trump. So I guess that all these factors will help the Republican did do a little bit better in the state of North Carolina. However, once again, I can ensure you that North Carolina is no longer a safe Republican state. It's a battleground state. It's a big battleground state, an interesting state to keep an eye on, and Democrat might be able to flip it in any upcoming election, despite the fact that I do think that for now it will stay red with the Republican. So thank you for listening to this video, and I'll see you very soon in a study of another battleground state of the 2020 election.